Well, good afternoon, everyone. How are you? Well, I know we're winding down and the podium's moving. And oh my gosh. um, Certainly appreciate the invitation. Um, and he gave my bio. There were components of that I was going to use in my introduction. So I'll skip that and just tell you that in I guess about 2004, I had recently transferred my responsibilities for conducting work zone traffic control, traffic management training, the training that we require in Maryland for individuals who are going to be setting up and taking down traffic control in work zones. And I used to conduct that training, and I recently passed those duties on to someone else on my staff. And he came to me and he said, Michael, we've got an issue out on one of our roadways. And the issue was there was an opening in a barrier section that was being used for ingress egress. And one end of the opening was protected by two sections of water-filled barrier turned upside down. End treatment. And I guess the standard end treatment for most water-filled barriers, at least for the Triton, the two sections upside down empty, and then you length the need, blah, 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 blah. So this was being used as an end treatment for the ingress egress point. And of course, when I saw it, I went ballistic. I was like, oh my gosh, somebody's going to die. So incidentally, we addressed it. We wound up moving the ingress egress point and just installing concrete barrier wall along that opening. Now, some of you might say, okay, so what? Why are you talking about this? Well, I've been working with the state of Maryland specifically, worked on traffic control, policy management, training, things of that nature for about 7 years. And in that 7 years, that is the only time that I have heard anything about ingress and egress issues in Maryland. So that tells me one of two things. First, it tells me that Maryland doesn't have an ingress egress problem in work zones. Okay? You're thinking like me. That's not true. Another thing that it could tell me is that there is some kind of self-correction that's going on internally with our agency. And I mean, when I say internally, I mean either between our agency and the contractor or in our contractors. Maybe we've got good contracts in Maryland. Not sure. But I just wanted to preface our talk today with the fact that work zone traffic control issues come to me quite frequently. I am the individual, our team is the clearinghouse for these issues statewide, and we handle a variety of them. And that is the only instance where we've had work on egress issues. And I tell you, I'm humbled and almost embarrassed sitting in on some of the sessions today and hearing about treatments and hearing about the thought that's being put into ingress egress issues nationwide, federal highways, some of the contractors. And I'm thinking, wow, Maryland is really not taking a good, hard, serious look. And even as I think about my presentation, and I'm not trying to be self-deprecating or anything, and some of you know exactly where that's going, but that's another story, that's a side joke. But my whole point is that what we're going to talk about today really is, if your expectations were something that you could go, man, Maryland's doing this and I'm taking this back and using it, or I'm afraid that you might be a little bit disappointed. You know, our approach is relatively simple, and in our instance, in our case, it seems to be effective because that issue is not being raised. But I'm telling you, gang, just in sitting in this room today and hearing some of the things that are going on, I'm thinking we need to do a whole lot more. You know, I'm back in front of papers. We need to do more. So anyway, with that being our preface, man, this guy's nuts. Okay, with that being our preface, we're pretty much going to talk about, I want to just hit on these four bulleted points. The rule, subpart K. I'm just going to gloss over it and then talk specifically about the ingress egress issue. I want to talk to you about what the state of Maryland is doing. What is the State Highway Administration in Maryland doing to address ingress egress issues? And I also want to talk to you about the additional proposed treatments. And when we get to that section, I guess I'll preface that with some discussion too. And then the ongoing assessment of issues related to work area entry and exit. First of all, I mean, pretty much all of us know and understand the final rule, subpart K. We need to be in compliance by December 4. It requires states of last year. It requires states to consider road use and worker safety, addressing positive protection, and of course that spun out into a lot of different policy measures on our end, exposure control measures and other traffic control measures. This the safe entry and exit of work zone vehicles equipment for the travel lanes. When you look at the subpart K, and this isn't a slant against FHWA, but the information can be lost in there, and you can easily miss it. And because it doesn't seem to jump out in the K, in subpart K, it almost could be perceived as something that's not important, and especially given our experience in Maryland or lack thereof. You know, it's kind of hard to really grab this and think about, well, what do we need to do? Do we have to make any changes, and what will those changes look like? So with subpart K coming down the pike and this requirement to have guidelines, policies, or a guidance on entry and exit, we decided to take a look at what we had already. What does the state of Maryland have? Again, our guidelines deal primarily with sign placement and work zones in the state of Maryland. We have our W1011, our truck sign. Oh boy. And our guidelines are provided in our general notes in our book of standards, our standard details, which are also included in our book of standards, and also in our standard specifications. So our guidelines are pretty much relegated to these areas, and they aren't plenteous. There aren't a lot of guidelines, and we'll talk about them and just look at what we have on the table. This is an excerpt from our general notes that I just pulled out, that we have, again, the signing, the work zone truck crossing sign, and this sign is restricted for use in these two situations. Whenever you have a work zone entrance on a controlled access facility, you may use this sign. Now, it's not required to be used, but you may use it, and only in this instance. Secondly, you can use this truck crossing sign along any other highways where there is a sight distance issue, where your minimum stopping sight distance is not being met, or the location or the ingress-egress point does not meet the minimum stopping sight distance area. So preferably, you want to relocate your work ingress-egress point, but if you can't for some reason, then you want to put this sign up. And then we have a typical application for our shoulder work, which is similar to the TAs and the MTCD, that gives insight and guidance on where sign placement ought to be. And we basically take that spacing from that TA or from that typical application, is what we call it. Oh, that's what a TA is, isn't it? We take that spacing and we apply it to our truck crossing sign. So like I said, our W1011 one, you can use it on controlled access facilities when you've got ingress-egress points, but it's not required. You can use it on any other facility where you've got a stopping sight distance deficiency. It's less than the requirement. Your entrance can be relocated. And you would place it at the same interval as the shoulder work signage in our typical. So this is basically just a cutout of our shoulder work typical. And you can see here our shoulder work signs here. And now the work zone, the W1011 truck sign wouldn't go here, but it would go at approximate intervals depending on where your ingress-egress point is along your work area. So that's that deals with the sign. Now, related to our standard specifications, and the signing and also our book of standards. So we've got our sign, our book of standards, and then our instruction in our standard specifications. So basically, in our standard specifications, we call for, or our standard specifications address the movement of these work vehicles, and we mandate that the vehicle entrance and exit has to be in the direction of the traffic flow. Now, that is if the entrance is going to be, or access to the entrance has to be from the travel lane. Of course, if the entry point, the exit point is going to be in a closed lane, then backing is permitted. And so that's pretty much it. And I guess having looked at this and having, with this invitation and looking at what Maryland has as its standards and details, And then with the call for subpart K, uh, we thought, and even prior to this conference, we thought, man, is this all we have? Well, perhaps this is working. Again, I'm not getting any feedback, and I'm not aware of any crashes or fatalities that are occurring due to ingress-egress issues. Again, that is something that is under the auspices of my particular team as well. But we thought, is there something else we could do? So we started snooping around and trying to figure out, what are other states doing? What do we see are reasonable measures for improving our ingress-egress of work zone vehicles? One of the things we looked at was specific vehicle safety lighting requirements. Now, the state of Maryland doesn't have or didn't have a comprehensive lighting package for vehicles. We have, in our book of standards, we have one detail on lighting, and it only deals with bucket trucks. So, well, what about if I have a pickup truck? What about if I have this type of vehicle? And our standards didn't address that. So we decided that we needed to look into that. Why? One of the issues with ingress-egress is you want to make sure that the motorist, at least, understands the vehicle that he's behind or adjacent to or in proximity to, and understands the possibility that vehicle might do something outside of the norm of travel, right? So we said, hey, we need to make sure that our vehicles are lit. I found in the past, and actually participated in it myself, we have oftentimes work zone vehicles that are not designated or are not identified as such. Oftentimes when I did inspections for the state of Maryland as a consultant, I used my personal vehicle. I had no markings, I had no lights, and I didn't catch any flack. I should have. I'm driving along I-95 in Maryland, and I say, okay, I need to duck in behind these cones and begin an inspection or check on this. And I hit my signal, I duck in the cones. What stopped the motorists from following me in there? Nothing. Okay, so the realization now that I'm on the policy making end specifically as a team leader, I'm thinking, we don't want that to happen. So one of the things is we have developed guidance on lighting packages to ensure proper visibility. We have cataloged every vehicle in the State Highway Administration's in their inventory of vehicles and as many construction vehicle types as we could, and we have assigned them into different categories, and we have different optional lighting packages for each of those. And we believe that with these lighting packages, and I think in an earlier seminar, there was mention about the 360-degree visibility and all those things. And there was an NCHRP report that was recently completed by, I believe it was Virginia Tech, that we looked at as a reference. And we also borrowed some ideas from Washington State DOT. They have a wonderful, wonderful lighting package for their work zone vehicles. So we borrowed some of their information. And here's the detail that to which I was referring. Again, we've got our categories. We have vehicle types. And we say, here are our categories. And then here are our relative options. You can use this package and this lighting system together. And then we also give guidance related to, can you read that? Okay. Then special instructions for each of those lighting packages. And then some additional information down here about what rotating lights are. Yeah, we say rotating lights, but are we speaking the same language? Well, when the state of Maryland says rotating lights in your vehicles, this is what we mean. What is a light bar? Michael, you said I can use a light bar. Is this okay? Well, what do we mean by a light bar? It's a housing unit or a group of housing, blah, 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 blah. Oh, okay, I know what that is now. So we provide device descriptions. We talked about the use of strobes is a big issue in Maryland. Individuals in Maryland, and maybe this could be ubiquitous across the states, but individuals in Maryland either don't light their vehicles or they Christmas tree them. Okay? They put lots of lights. And of course, we talked about going tangential in the context of work zones, working in work zones at night. You know that if you have certain lights, you can create glare, you can create issues. And this is no different. If you've got too many lights on your vehicles, you can do the same thing. So we wanted to, if you want to this way, ratchet it down a little bit to make sure that the lighting packages were reasonable and sensible and didn't create an additional distraction. So this is our lighting detail. And also out of this, we're probably looking at developing an internal policy on state highway administration vehicles. Again, it seems like the problem is not only the contractors, but it's primarily the agency. The other thing is, we don't follow me. Just I love the title, and maybe you guys will like, yeah, whatever. But I just think it's really good to think about what's happening with regard to the interaction between work zone vehicles and motorists. And we said, hey, we borrowed some ideas from some other states. We looked at what they were doing when we were trying to make sure we were in compliance with Subpart K. And we decided that we needed to consider putting signing on, and that's what we're going to do, putting signing on vehicles, which we've seen. Again, some of the things that we're learning from other states, they're not overly creative or innovative, but they're effective. And that's what we're after. Sometimes we have to use innovation to be effective, but not always. We can do something someone else is doing, or we can take an idea and massage it, move it, and we can get effect. So we're going to put these signs, we're going to require these signs on any vehicles that are delivering loads to a job site. We're only going to require them to do it for nighttime jobs. Now, does that mean that no workers follow vehicles into the work zone during the day? My question, I guess, to my team, to myself is, okay, how common is that phenomenon, and do we need to do something about it? We talked about the relative disorientation that occurs in motorists at night. You're driving down the road at night, and especially considering the fact that we don't have a detailed, comprehensive lighting specification to require lighting to be set up a certain way in work zones, which is another thing that I'm going to be working on when I get back to Maryland. I believe that individuals driving in their cars are going to have a tougher time discerning, understanding, processing information when they're driving through a work zone. If they see a work zone vehicle turn off, if there's not enough lighting to show exactly where that vehicle is going, yes, the phenomenon of following work zone vehicles into the work zone is going to occur. But is that the case in the daytime? When I think about that, I say, okay, in the daytime, you have a lot more visibility, you've got a longer line of sight, and so if a vehicle is turning into an area that you can see is clearly marked out as the work zone, you may not experience that occurrence as frequently as you will at night. And that was one of the reasons why we restricted this signing detail to nighttime operation. And again, that doesn't mean that we won't make changes. We're going to take a look at all these treatments and see how they're working, and if we need to tweak them, we will. Okay? And again, the whole point is to protect workers from errant vehicles. Now, we haven't even, again, I tell you, I'm humbled and embarrassed because we haven't really begun to tackle the issue of the internal work zone. And that's something that I'm probably going to mention in a few slides, but that's another issue. Okay, Michael, you get them in there, or you get your work zone vehicles in there, but now you're not having to worry about motorists following the vehicles in and killing workers. Now you've got to worry about your own vehicles doing it, the contractors' vehicles. That's something else that we might need to touch on. And historically, just as a side note, historically, my unit hasn't really been involved in internal works and traffic control. It looks like something that needs to be taken, at least acting as a liaison with contractors or other individuals who are doing these types of setups. We also, in our proposed treatments, we also are making allowance for supplemental PPMS sign. Now, one of our big problems in Maryland is that PPMS is portable variables, portable changeables, however you decide to refer to them. They're overused. They're used in lieu of static signs, and they're supplementary signs. In these cases where the ingress and egress points might be more complexly located and we want to provide additional advance warning to motorists, or we've got ramp junctions coming in and you can't place signs in a certain place, or you want to give added information, we said, hey, you need to look at using PPMS signing. Now, some of us might think, Michael, that's self-evident. People should be doing it anyway. If you've got an issue that you've got to mention, but again, it goes back to the whole of Subpart J and Subpart K. Oftentimes, the things that are being called for in those two rules, many of our states are already doing, but they haven't been documented. They're not encapsulated in written form. And this is another area where we want to say, hey, we might already be doing it, but we want to put it down on paper so that people will know for certain that it's permitted and it's something that we enjoy. We want to make a recommendation, and we encapsulated that in written text to say, hey, you guys need to, are folk doing it? I'm certain there are contractors and there's contractor agency interaction that is calling for this inspect or calling for this contract documents. They're just doing it because they know it's good business practice and they know it's safer. I'm sure there are folks that are doing it. But again, from an agency standpoint, we got to encapsulate these things. We got to make sure that folks know, hey, we think that this is important. We got it on paper, and now you go ahead and make sure you're doing it. It doesn't help or hurt the individuals who are already practicing it. It addresses the ones that aren't, because we want everyone to be practicing safe. We want everyone to have safe practices when they're out on the job. Ongoing issues assessment. Okay, we've talked about basically what the state of Maryland has in its books now and in the process of doing. Because when I say proposed, what I mean is we have the documents already completed, but they're going through their final review and they're shortly going to be on the street being implemented. So proposed doesn't mean, oh, I'm thinking about it. Proposed means they're going to be on the road in a few minutes, if you will. But in addition to those things, we want to make sure that we're continuing to identify, and you know, this stuff, you probably have heard it this morning or in the past couple of days, but again, because of Subpart K and by looking into this, some of the things that I've been thinking about, you know, how are the facility characteristics, you know, affecting ingress, egress, and are they addressed in our standards? Are they addressed in our details? And I think that's the issue. We can say, yeah, we need to think about this, but does the agency address these in their policy? Does placing work zone signing on a controlled access facility address accel, decel issues or alignment constraints? Does it? It might, but maybe not in all cases. Does placing my sign in a certain place or with a certain configuration, does it address traffic volumes and queues? Well, Michael, have you considered the configuration of your access? How are they getting in? And how's traffic affected? Do your standards and policies address that, Michael? Michael, what about motorist expectancy? Are you giving motorists ample time to make a decision on what they ought to do while this vehicle is about to enter the roadway or exit the roadway? I don't know. And I'm looking. What about work zone sign? You got a sign. Is that enough? Do you need more? Is your PVMS going to address the issues? And so here is where Maryland is, and these are the things that we're thinking about. Here are the things we've done. Here are the things that are going to be on the street in a short time. And here's where we're looking to go. And I just, again, I appreciate the opportunity to be at this conference, because there are some ideas that certainly their time is now. And we're going to be looking at putting those on the street and figuring out what the best way is to develop policies and standards to address them and actually implement them. And so if you want to, you can go to our book standards website and take a look at some of our standards, our details, and what we have right now and soon to come to address our ingress and egress issues, and also our standard specifications, construction and materials, which talk about what vehicles must do when they want to ingress, egress, when they're going in and out. Where is parking to be placed? And that was another issue. Contract parking. Where is he parked? And how is the parking related to ingress, egress? Well, I'm telling you, currently there's no correlation. We say, yep, the contractor must park his vehicles in a certain location, but there's no correlation between that location and the ingress, egress point. Okay? Somebody says, well, it's common sense. Obviously not, or we wouldn't be having this conference. And so the state of Maryland this is another thing. Of course, I didn't have time to add that in my presentation because I just found that out today. So, but that's certainly something that the state of Maryland is going to be looking at. Again, I appreciate the opportunity to talk about the work that we're doing and the work that we're going to do and the work that's currently in the mental processes that's soon to come out.